Hello and welcome everyone who's tuned in and listening to this session. Super excited to have Preeti on board. Just a quick introduction in terms of who Preeti is and why we are so excited to have her as a part of this conversation. She's a very seasoned risk advisory and compliance and risk at large professional, having been with a company like Deloitte, and then of course worked with many companies across the globe and advising them quite a bit on various sort of risk mandates and risk programs. She has a very keen interest in AI governance from her own work and from what she's also been generally learning and sharing over a period of time. So I'm super thrilled to have her as a part of this conversation and get her 2 cents, get her perspective on what we should all as professionals, as enterprises, getting ready for this onslaught of AI should do or not do as a part of their AI risk and AI governance program. So welcome, Preeti. Thank you for taking our time. I really appreciate it and excited to have you here as a part of the conversation.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Ishan. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm going to start off with a topic that you have spoken about and you've kind of even, written about online. And this is something we see across borders. There's so much going on in AI. AI is just everywhere, right? And a lot of the enterprise AI is really, in some sense, the way I think about it is very distributed, very federated. There's no one unified program that's running across companies. And a lot of them are POCs, right? Various people across the ladders, across organizations, across verticals are just trying to jump in and get some AI initiative, AI program going. Now, the question that I think about quite a bit, and I hear different stories, is how many of these experiments, these wonderful things that various teams are getting involved in, is actually going live, right? And what's unfolding really? And I know this is a topic, this is a broader area that you've also kind of mulled over, thought about, spoken about, and spoken to at various customers. So would like to get your perspective there. How do you see the evolution from this experiment POC to production at this point in time? What are you seeing? What are you sensing? What are you hearing? What are the good things? What are the not so good things around it?
That's fantastic. And I can imagine, Shashank, there is no day by or no minute that you're not talking about AI and now agentic AI and what does that mean in production. So you're rightly identifying the gap in the industry, which is really coming to a point where the question is no longer whether AI is real, whether we need to be including AI as part of our workflow or as part of our business. It's really about how can we scale and how can we scale with the right safeguards. That's where the crux of the question is right now being asked, whether it is asked by boards, regulators, or customers that organizations are supporting. The one thing that I would say is that's stopping the scaling is there is a lot of interest in pilots. There is a lot of experimentation that is happening. But where one thing it stops is I don't know if this will be operating in the same manner when it goes into production, where production data might be more messy. Is it governed? Would it be governed when I run it? Would it go rogue? Can things go wrong? As well as, is it auditable? If questions are asked, how much time would I need to take to respond back? And the understanding from whether it is regulatory regime that is shaping up across EU.ai Act or otherwise, it's quite clear that the days and the time that is required to respond to these, if things go wrong or the decision that is being made, and you have to retrospectively look into it, it's no longer acceptable that you can go back and take a month, couple weeks. It's really in the matter of within 2 days, can you produce that and produce it more continuously? And I think that's where the pain is felt. And when I think about governance, I don't think about governance from just, we have our policy. This is the values that we have, the ethical considerations as part of organization. That conversation has left long back. Even when we were talking about this back in 2018 or 2019, when things were really picking up from what does ethics mean in AI, and then leave apart when LLMs came about in 2022 with ChatGPT, the conversation shifted, right? It's more operational. It's more how can we make sure these are being addressed in operation. And that is where we are seeing a lot more organizations, and maybe the metrics that are out there, 80% or 70% organizations that have done a lot of pilots, but only 15% or 20% organizations and leadership in the organizations feel comfortable that they will be able to govern when these are productionalized at scale. That's where the real issue comes to light. I would also say that what are these failure points? To touch it on that, it's about integration. Integration then the pilot of your AI model or agentic AI touches your different systems, your legacy systems. It's also about data. Now I'm touching not just structured data, it's unstructured data. How am I going to govern that? Contextual. So like these are the questions. The third one being it's about inconsistency or quality of output that's coming from the model or the AI decision that is being taken. The fourth one that would be into ownership. Who is responsible and the accountability of where this sits in? Do you have understanding of that? Is there a human in the loop that is able to make that call that, yes, this is, if things go wrong, I am the person, I am the human that is there to monitor? It's also about monitoring. So the fifth one would be the monitoring, continuous monitoring.
Right.
And I think out of all of these five that I just said, it's no longer a data science question. It's everything around it, which pins into governance or holistic governance.
Very good point, actually. A lot of very, I would say, pertinent observations and pertinent points that you've made here, Preeti, as a part of your, sort of illustration of the challenge, if I were to call it that. And I think, just to double click on a couple of those, as you mentioned, one is, of course, our ability, and when I say our broadly as enterprises adopting AI, the ability to even have the tooling, the monitoring, the visibility, the understanding to even answer those questions confidently itself remains a big question, right?
Yeah.
Like our organizations are in a position to even answer them, forget how well they answered them, right? So I think like that's a big part of the puzzle. And then I think you also rightly called out that there is almost like there are almost two different phases, almost two different tasks. It's one thing to bring on a quick POC and experiment and fire things up and see the benefits, and that's exciting, right? That's important also for any new technology to kind of get inroads and people to get comfortable with it. But then the moment you start getting into production, I
Yeah.
think the biggest part, the way I think about it, kind of paraphrasing what you said, is accountability, right? Like if you really just boil down to one word, right? Like, well, who's making the decisions? Do we know what decisions are being made? Who's accountable for it? Do we understand what's informing it? Do we understand what's behind it? Can we change it? Right? Should something go wrong, can we answer confidently? Right? So like all of those different vectors become extremely important. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
exciting. That's very cool. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that perspective. Now I
Shashank,
would, yeah.
I would just say that you triggered an interesting point when you talked about accountability, and I was in a recent conversation where this shift is also touching is when you talk about accountability, it's about operating model, it's about operating construct. Because every business, every function will now need to have these agents, these AI running in their workflows. Are
Hmm.
the organization itself or the function itself now recognizing that the operations of how this needs to be done with the human that was originally equipped to make these decisions, to handle work with human and human, their responsibility will change. They are now governing agents equipped to do that. So accountability is also not a simple accountability definition that we used to have traditionally. So I think your point on accountability is spot on, because that clarity of what accountability means, the roles responsibility, and the domain-led governance is also becoming an interesting challenge to be solved for.
True, true. No, that's actually well articulated. And in fact, I think when we talk about agents per se as well, it's a whole spectrum, and we're getting more and more towards fully autonomous agents. But how much, like basically that word agency, if you may, which is kind of central to agents, right? Like if you really give it full agency, and
Yeah.
if AI is going to make the entire decisions and kind of, go in its own direction, at some point in time, we are headed there and we're already seeing some of that unfold. Well, we as humans, what's our role in there, right? And how do we treat them? and how much can we control them, and how much of that, behavioral outcomes can we be responsible for versus, things we have no idea, honestly speaking, why what is happening, or why what is occurring is occurring. So I think, like, yeah, there's a whole lot of, sort of complexity around it. What I want to ask you is, you speak to a lot of customers, you're seeing this industry evolve. In terms of risk appetite and just agentic, like more of these agentic outcomes, do you see that unfolding rapidly? Are people mentally comfortable saying, yeah, let's go with agent, let's just, bring them in? Or is there still a lot of hesitation? Because I've also seen it's a whole spectrum. Some companies are leaning in heavily. They want to go, faster than even what might be advisable. And then there are others who are like, no, no, hold on, wait, for the same reasons. I got to figure out what these agents are going to do, right? Are they going to
Yeah.
get run haywire in my system and cause more headache and cause more liability? And so, what are you seeing there? Like, share some nuggets there. What's your observation?
Shashank, talking about agents, I think everybody is experimenting with agents.
Hmm.
What's interesting in my dialogue with clients is anytime that we talk about agents and I mention that the agentic risks are different from what we were thinking about, whether it was generative AI or LLMs, or it was AI ML or traditional AI, that's where the aha moment comes to light, because they don't
Hmm.
think that they if the maturity in the in day to day is about, yes, hallucination and misinformation, I think those are now well understood with last year. Yes, if you see 2025, there was quite a good recognition of LLMs are probabilistic. These are not deterministic. You have to make
Hmm.
sure that whatever is coming out, don't just take as is. It's the accountability of you as a human. I think with agents, the spectrum is changing.
Okay.
And the spectrum is changing because agents now have, to your point, agency to make decision, to act
Right.
on their own. So
Right.
that is where goal misalignment, risks that were not understood before are coming into equation. It's about cascading error that could happen because in your workflow, now you have agents that have taken decision, and that is if one agent goes wrong or does something not needed, that is a compounded error rate that you are going to see. And that will again impact when you have to go and determine at what step did it go wrong. The other would be autonomy, as well as, I mean, yes, agents have autonomy, and the level of autonomy will increase your risk as well. And the connectivity that agents are now touching your production system where customer data is there. And that is a critical crown jewel or a crown jewel application. Those are aspects which you didn't think about before, but now play a very critical role. And leave apart that, with some of the interesting cases that we are hearing now, and up until last year, it was very much done in a sandbox. Yes, agents can go wrong. You have, agents that are, maybe acting and blackmailing. Some of these scenarios have been now
Hmm.
seen, but they are becoming
Right.
real because it's no longer a sandbox environment. Very recently, like in the couple months of February, as well as, I think last month, there has been cases where, yes, if you have an agent and you put an agent to do a task, it can actually exploit some of the known vulnerabilities just to be able to make sure that the goal is done or delivered. Even the case with that was in February about Madball or RJ Rathburn, that was very interesting because you had that agent making sure that I need to update this in the library, and the human
Right.
was stopping it, right? So going to an extreme extent of trying to defame the individual was an interesting thing. I was like very amazed to see that this is actually happening. In all sides, we can laugh about it, but if you think about it, this is where we are getting. And if we don't have those guardrails built in, if we don't think about runtime governance that is embedded through a platform, if we don't think about policy as code as part of your built environment, those are things that you will run into these situations, and there might be reputational risks that are not so nice and expose the organization in all sorts of wrong ways. So
Yeah, no,
that's
no,
where
that's
I'm seeing quite a
totally, totally. No, and you called out again a few interesting observations because, yes, they're still isolated, they're fewer, but I think there'll be more of those where agencies translating on to outcomes where the bot or the agentic software or whatever that you've actually brought in into that mechanism is making its own decisions and many a times not how you expected it to make, whether it's exploiting a vulnerability, whether it's going in the wrong direction. We've seen instances like you also mentioned, databases being wiped out or certain things being done in a malicious or unfavorable way. And I think more of that will happen because obviously
yeah.
I think when you start building that as a part of your workflow and certain steps are being carried out in an autonomous fashion by these agents, more of that will be determined by them, those agents in action. And I think that you're right that whole sort of equation completely changes. It's no more about, hey, that's probabilistic and I may not get the same outcome. It becomes a notch way higher than that, where we don't even know how it'll unfold or what the ramifications of some of these data being provided would end up coming out. Now, we do hope that most of the cases will be favorable and we'll all get very productive. That's why we're all championing this. But I feel even in the certain cases, even in the 10% cases where it's going to go out of hand, the outcomes could be extremely disastrous, right? That they could be very dangerous. And I think you make another good point there because in that situation, what are you going to do if you create a policy like today? If you have a policy, I mean, just let's just run with one simple case, right? We've all seen this as a part of our governance programs. The policies for everything and anything, right? And specifically in large organizations like large banks or healthcare companies or large regulated entities, there's usually lots of policies. And most humans are trained around it. They are socialized, they've been made to acknowledge it. And then there is a certain control mechanism for each of those policies, whether implemented in software or through behavioral extensions or punishments or whatever outcomes they may be. They get enforced in a systematic fashion. But you're right, if it's an agent, and if you've set a policy as well for it to not do something, would it necessarily just follow the policy unless you get into runtime and you actually have safeguards in place that would come in and block it should it start going in the wrong direction? The concept of policy this becomes in spirit with no applicability once agents are fully live and running in production, right? So I think that you make a very good point there that the policies in terms of text and words will start becoming less and less important when you get into more and more agentic flows. You actually need that to be manifestation of reality, like policy as code or safeguards or blockers or whatever they may be that step in. And maybe those will be agents too. Who knows? Agents fighting agents to say, hey, here's a policy agent saying this is not allowed, get out of here or don't do this. This is something that's going to be detrimental. But yeah, it's going to be some fun runtime
Yeah.
mechanics that we might see unfolding.
Actually, Shashank, the conversations and design thinking is already happening. What you're talking
Hmm.
about, agents governing agents, is no longer a concept. I mean,
Right.
it's already there. We know that these guardian agents are being created. We cannot monitor, manage, orchestrate all of these agents. So you have to start thinking about managing differently. And that's why your first point on the scaling and how do we scale, I think one of the things is also that you need to be ready to monitor them, to ensure that you're logging what actions are being taken by these agents. You have the right capability. And that's not just the capability from you understanding what your policy and your frameworks and your eval frameworks are there. It's also the capability that is functional capability that you can
Hmm.
deliver with people understanding, trained, and doing it. And I would say that one absolutely must thought process that needs to happen in any organization that is moving forward with AI at full speed is thinking about AI operations. Where's your AI ops lifecycle? Do you have that?
Right.
Because governance is not going to be, as you pointed out, a policy or a manual document that is either delivered by governance bodies and the check the box exercises that were being done previously. It needs to be part of your operations. It needs to be across the life cycle of how agents or AI is identified, the feasibility of it, designed, thought through, and then developed and also validated along the way and then monitored or decommissioned. I think it's really moving from that governance is not a side box exercise, it's part of your operations, part of your AI development lifecycle. And this development lifecycle needs to now expand to all of the other solutions or embedded AI that's coming from your existing products that were already approved. So you don't get into the trap of shadow AI happening. How are you doing that? I think these are all important questions that needs to be answered. And I think without having AI supporting and managing this, without having a platform to manage this, I think that that's a no longer a question. It's how are you doing that, and are you equipped to handle that?
Truly, truly. No, no, no. That's well said. And in fact, that's how when, we were also envisioning this problem as sort of tool builders and platform builders, one of the biggest question was, you can build for a certain sliver, but then will it really be effective? Right. And I think it goes back to that same fundamental challenge that you have pointed out quite accurately is, firstly, the speed, the pace at which these agents will unfold outcomes, right, or bring forth outcomes is very different from the normal pace that, in general, risk and compliance and governance programs have been used to, right? There's a lot happening, bigger scale, lots of it all at once. So even understanding and having full visibility into it definitely needs that same level of automation. It certainly needs, and sort of embedded slice into that same workflow, the same AI op, the same instrumentation, the same automation, where this, particular sort of AI native automation is being realized. It needs to be right alongside there. And then the other associated piece that I'm seeing here, Preeti, is that, AI is coming in a very, call it unorganized or disorganized manner, which is its beauty as well. But, at the same time, that's another piece from a governance standpoint I see as challenging, because it's not like all the AI applications are necessarily coming through a structured way in organizations. There are people who are experimenting with tools and they're installing on their desktops and, completing tasks. And those are also getting access to a lot of critical things without they realizing what that even means or what implications are there. Vendors are adding AI capabilities. So a lot of these tools, sometimes you're flying blind unless you've asked your vendors if they are using AI actively or running, AI risk management as part of your third party risk management program or whatever that you do as a part of a vendor risk. You may not even be aware. It's already there, right? You're already sort of interfacing with AI without realizing that your HR software or billing software or time management software or something else is already sort of, using AI behind the scenes. And then the last part of that equation, or not the last, but another important part of the equation that I think we're beginning to discuss, you kind of alluded to it, but is not so much front and center as like, what do standard protocols and ways of governance and risk management look like in this new world? Because today there are some structured ways, call it that, of doing incident response, structured ways of doing disaster recovery, structured ways of doing business continuity planning, structured ways of doing, other kinds of exercises, failovers, and so on and so forth, which are all very critical, already with our cloud native distributed environments. But when AI steps in and AI comes in, a lot of that might look very different and, might even sort of surface newer challenges, because let's say an agentic process going haywire or not functioning would need a very different level of a BCP exercise, for example, or even understanding of ramifications. And, what would it look like in terms of incident response? Like, if a human jumps in, or would a human even jump in? Because a lot of that incident response is also being automated out, for example, with AI. So, what would that incident response AI do with the failure of another system that is very AI native and agentic native? And what does that look like, right? Would you still have an escalation process? Would there be a role, and what would that role look like for humans to step in? When do they step in? Do we still have the traditional level 1, level 2, level 3, so on and so forth, right? Like, those are just some things to think about. But I think like the governance equation is complex.
Yeah.
So on that note, I want to ask you another couple of things around this. What should be the shape of governance? What should AI governance look like, right? Like, how should
Yeah.
companies approach it, or how should anybody approach it? What's your 2 cents there, Preeti?
I would say that yes, we talk about governance, we talk about risk. I would say, and I would lean into a little bit more on, the positive side of how you need to see governance and risk. right? And where I'm going with this is because you asked the question, which is what does a good governance or a risk program look like? What it should look like is where are my risks? I need to know, and those are my risk exposures that I need to address. Right now, what's happening is it's a blanket approach. I see all AI, I see all of my agents. I may be a risk and control function. I don't know what is acceptable. Is it within my risk appetite? I'm going to stop everything. And I'm going to look at it from the same lens. And I think that is where organizations can benefit if they think about individual AI use cases, think about what risks are applicable or within the use case, within the context of the outcome of the AI, you think about the impact and you think about the risk and you think about mitigation. That is really going to make it executable and also allow your innovation teams to go fast. Use your highways, right?
Right.
What's difficult is to understand where my those high mediums and lows and very highs and customer exposures, where do I put all the right rigors versus not? And that's where your understanding of risk tiering, your materiality assessment comes into play. It also comes into play is what is the maturity of your own organization? So are you with the maturity of the organization in mind, and that is not coming from ground up. It needs to come from the tone at the top. What are we? What are our bold bets? How are we as an organization going to invest in so we mature ourselves? We bring humans part of AI equation, not the other way around to replace humans. It's really humans using AI for the benefit. And then we mature that so that the categorization or AI framework that we talk about, where AI is assisting and it's just used for text generation or summarization, the risks are going to be very low. But as you move into semi-autonomous or autonomous type of agents or AI, that's where you need to put on those rigors. So I would challenge everybody that think about, do you have clarity? And it's not just your clarity from one function that is really innovation function and bringing AI into the enterprise. It's also cross-functional. It's bringing all the functions that you just talked about, third party and legal. It's bringing your data risk function. It's bringing your technology security risk function. It's bringing your model risk function together. So the risk appetite that we have as part of the organization can also be flexible and be mobilized according to our own risk exposures and risk mitigation that is acceptable to the organization. And I think that's really makes your risk management and your governance program A, flexible, but also B, helping the organization move fast with the pace that they can handle. And in this, you build your capability. So I actually am very strong promoter that you have to think about this as a entire wholesome capability that touches end to end, not just a piecemeal. And you have to think about it. This should be an investment coming from the top. It shouldn't be organically some functions trying to do and bring it up, and then the board is going to ask, where is the ROI? What is the investment, right? These questions are coming up more and more now because it's the return on investment that you have to prove to. So if you keep it grounded, if you keep your risk and control partners part of the equation with your innovation team, together you're going to make much faster progress, much faster change management cultural progress that is critical to this, and achieve the vision that AI brings to the table, which is more transformative rather than one use case at a time.
I love that. I love the approach, one very positive approach, which is exciting. I'm sure everybody listening in wants to hear that as well, right? They're all excited about AI. And then I think the holistic approach is very, very, very relevant and very pertinent, right? And I think that's one of the big challenges where there's a lot of piecemeal stuff going on, and how do we bring it in as an integrated program, right? So that companies can confidently and peacefully sort of march towards AI to their benefit at the end of the day. I know we are almost wrapping up here for this time, but looks like we'll have to have you back. There's just so much good wealth of information that you've shared. Where do people find you? You know, I'm sure people listening to this will come back and say, we got to get hold and listen to more of these words of wisdom from Preeti. So where is Preeti online? How do they find you? And how do they connect with you if anybody's listening to this?
Oh, Shashank, that is so kind of you. Well, I am available on LinkedIn. Anybody who wants to reach me, my profile is there. Please connect with me. Any questions that I can answer, or I can have a conversation. We're all learning and evolving in the space of AI right now, and I'm all open for anything and everything that comes with it. AI is here to make our lives easier, is my belief. So make sure that we are putting all the right safeguards for the betterment of our use as well as for our humanity. So please reach out.
Excellent. What a wonderful note to kind of close this conversation on. I really loved it. Thank you again for joining this little conversation. And as I mentioned, truly, we'll have you back on to talk more about AI and other good stuff around governance and risk and, the whole sort of adjacent areas. Thank you, Preeti.
I am very grateful, Shashank, and kudos to you and the team for doing a fantastic job in bringing scalability through your own platform. Appreciate it to you as well as to all the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.